Welcome to the New Warehouse Podcast, the podcast for those that are curious about what's possible inside their four walls. Before we get into this episode, let's hear a word from our sponsors that make this all possible. In my operations years, it seemed like we were always trying to find more space or we needed a quick storage solution for a special project. That's why when I discovered Palletite and their Palletite Pix solution, I was excited. Made from ultra-strong, engineered honeycomb structured board, these corrugated shelving units can support up to 1,100 pounds. They're definitely stronger than they look, and they come to you flat packed for easy installation in minutes. I've built them and utilized them myself. They provide customizable configurations with up to 400 pick faces. If you need storage quick or you need to maximize space utilization, you need Palletite. Check them out at pallettegroup.com. That's PALLITE group.com. Do you feel like automation is unapproachable? Well, Big Joe Autonomous Solutions is changing that with the AP44. The AP44 is a fully autonomous pallet truck built for real work. Floor-to-floor pallet transportation, no infrastructure changes, no complicated IT project. Setup happens right at the onboard touchscreen. If you can use a smartphone, you can use the AP44. Just select a mission and the AP44 gets moving. Easy switch between fully autonomous, semi-autonomous, and manual mode on this pallet jack keeps it versatile. Learn more at BigJoeForklifts.com. That's BigJoeForklifts.com. Thank you to our sponsors, and now let's get to the podcast.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
Hey, it's Kevin with the New Warehouse Podcast, bringing you a new episode today. And on today's episode, we are going to dive into what it takes to build out greenfield sites, especially highly automated ones, from someone that has done this for their career and has done it at, you could arguably say, the highest level, potentially. And that is Michael Erhard, and he is the head of operations engineering at Amazon. So he's going to give us some tips how he kind of navigates working through things at large scale, how he looks at buildings, how he looks at the kind of changing demand from consumers when it comes to fulfillment, and how he's looking at that as he designs buildings and looks at buildings within a logistics network. So, Michael, very excited to get you on the show here. How are you today?
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks, Kevin. I'm good. I'm excited for our conversation. I'm glad that we are together today, and I think we will have some interesting topics to cover around, automation, warehousing, logistics, etc. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yes, absolutely. Excited to tap into your experience and knowledge and kind of what you see in the industry as well. Normally on the podcast, I tell people to give us a brief overview of what their company does, but I don't think we need to say anything about Amazon. I'm pretty sure everybody's aware of Amazon, but maybe to kick it off and tell us about your role. You're head of operations engineering. So what does that mean exactly? What are you responsible for?
Yes, yeah, of course. So, I've been basically planning, designing, and launching fulfillment centers for the last 15 years, not just for Amazon, also before that. I think I've been covering almost all areas of the world, from CIS through Europe to NA, MENA, LATAM, and APAC. has been very exciting journey. But in particular, in the last 10 years with Amazon, I have been responsible for the fulfillment center network in Europe. So I've been leading a team of 50 people that are basically responsible for designing those fulfillment centers, planning everything, and then executing the projects, basically from an idea until we are launching a live site and welcome like hundreds and thousands of associates to work in those new facilities. And I think over the decade, I have been building more than 50 facilities. I think for Europe, actually, that's probably 80% of the entire network that Amazon has built. From a first mile perspective. And of course, we also have done hundreds of retrofit projects across the legacy network of facilities to get them up to the latest and greatest technologies and level of automation that we have. I think it's almost, more than $3.3 billion of investment volumes that the team has been handling over the last decade to, as I would say, logistics infrastructure projects. For Amazon. And beyond that, it's not just pure execution and design of those facilities. We have also been doubling down a lot on value engineering programs, on a new innovation and automated solutions, and many other global cross-functional programs. So it has been a very exciting journey over the last decade, and I think we will talk a little bit about it today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can only imagine, exciting. And also, I mean, if you think about the last 10 years, I mean, obviously, I think everybody's aware of just the explosion of growth in e-commerce in general, but also from like the Amazon perspective. So I can only imagine kind of the fast pace and the environment that you've been in to put out those, like you said, 50 buildings. I mean, that's a lot in 10 years, right? I mean,
it's a lot, yes. Yeah. And we had also a few global challenges like COVID, supply chain crisis, or other disruptions. So it hasn't been an easy ride, I have to say.
Yeah. So being in that position, obviously, going through massive growth and having, I imagine having multiple projects going at the same time to be able to hit that scale and that kind of volume. I mean, tell us a little bit about, how do you, as, someone that's kind of heading up this organization that's making this effort, I mean, how do you manage that? How do you go about that? And how do you work with your team? And how do you operate as kind of the leader of this?
Yes. So I think for me, there are two things that stand out. First one is actually the people themselves. So in order to do this at scale and at the speed that we are operating and have been operating, it's really important to have a self-sufficient team that is thriving and under complex and high ambiguous environments. People that are actually ready to go the extra mile and just, figure it out, solve problems. Because when you operate at this scale, you always have a plan, of course, but things always go wrong, especially when you're hitting, execution phase and construction starts and you have like hundreds of construction workers on those greenfield projects that you are responsible for, and everything is happening at a very, very high pace. So it's very important to have a team that is highly skilled, highly motivated, and is just willing to deliver, a bar-raising experience for our internal customers and then also for the external customers that receive all our parcels. And at the same time, I think it's really crucial that it's not just about, excellent project managers, but also having innovative and creative engineers in your team, because we will probably talk about this later. There's some point of a journey of a greenfield project where you need to be an excellent project manager, but then later on, you actually need to be an innovator, a creator, an engineer that really understands the technical depth of what's happening. Those people are hard to find, but Amazon is, I think, very attractive for that. And of course, they have amazing growth opportunities being part of this team. For instance, one project manager usually handles a scope of $80 million. That's like a project worth, and that's very exciting for them. So that's more on the execution side. The second thing that I will mention in terms of leadership and how to manage it for me has always been think big. And that's more for me as the leader of the team and maybe the senior managers in my team and, the directors and VPs I'm operating with. This is for us more to work upstream in a strategic space. So what do I mean by that? I need to be extremely well connected with supply chain, capacity planning, the worldwide engineering teams that are designing the facilities, our procurement and vendor development team. So I want to be at the pulse of all those planning and design instruments. And I want to, first of all, understand what's going on, but then also from my experience, influence it, drive decisions in terms of design, timelines, capacity, when we can launch, things like that, so that we have a bit of an alignment on the leadership level, what's actually possible to execute, in a given point of time or timeline. So I think as a leader, I need to operate very heavily upstream, be involved in the long-term vision and operate strategically. And then when we are going more into the execution tactical space, you need those highly motivated, safe, self-sufficient people that can then run the show.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's, very interesting to hear that and how you kind of approach that. Because I mean, I think it's, to your credit, like, going through that kind of scale and growth in 10 years. I mean, I can only imagine some of the maybe stressful days you've had, but I feel like that seems like a very kind of rewarding, but also like high pressure environment in some cases, right? So I mean, it's really incredible that you've been able to do this and then bring in, like you said, these project managers and really focus on the people that can execute and deliver to be able to do that. So I imagine there's multiple projects going on at one time as you're building out a large logistics network. So how do you kind of balance that amongst the teams, and like how do you make sure that, like, all right, this project's kicking off, but this project is midway, and maybe this one is like just about to get across the finish line? Like, how do you make sure all the focus is evenly distributed or equally weighted amongst the multiple projects that are going on?
First, I think I would zoom out a little bit, because it all starts with the standardization of the, FCs, so fulfillment centers themselves. Because if every of those projects would be, a one-off, like a snowflake design, how we used to call it, then it would be really difficult to operate at this scale. But standardization in terms of design and then also execution gives us a certain level of, safety, security, and stability. So if we stay with that for a second, if you want to operate at this scale and launch, 10, 15 highly automated sites at the same time, you need to have a certain blueprint for those facilities. I usually call this templates. Depending on what's the purpose of the building, are you shipping sortable items, which are small, that's the majority of the Amazon items, or maybe non-sortable, like non-conveyable items would be a different building type. Or maybe you have a hazmat site, which has very specific requirements, would be a different building type. So, or a return center. I mean, I think you understand what I mean. Every building type needs basically a template design from inbound to outbound across all the floors, how the facility in ideal case would look like. Working backwards basically from the capacity, outbound and inventory capacity that the building needs to hold. And then you find the right material flow and technologies to accomplish that, depending on what matters to you, safety, ergonomics, speed, cost, like all those standard elements. But those templates, they need to be flexible, because real estate out there, especially in Europe, rarely looks like the ideal blueprint that we created in the basically. So the design needs to be flexible, modular, so that it fits into the actual projects that we want to execute, but all following basically a certain standard. And I think in terms of standardization, I would also highlight working with the right vendors and integrators for, material handling equipment, storage solutions, robotics, And then for execution, so mainly for my team, having robust processes and standards through all those different phases that you mentioned earlier, the planning phase, the installation commissioning phase, the go live and ramp up phase. How do we operate during the first peak? So it's really important that we have playbooks, but I like to have very agile playbooks. So I always tell my team, this is like a skeleton to follow, but it's made to deviate because a lot can go wrong, and every project writes its own story at some point in time. There's always something waiting behind the corner that will just ruin everything that you have been doing so far, and your plan actually becomes obsolete. So this is where I think adaptability comes in. And then it's again about the people. So you're on the construction side, you're in the middle of what's happening, you're deploying the standard tailored to that specific project. But then, there's COVID hitting us, or a supply chain crisis, or we need more resources. So to install the equipment at the time that we have foreseen for the project. So it's really important to be adaptable, to be focused on the problem, to be boots on the ground. Like my team, for instance, is more or less full-time on-site, working with our integrators, like Vanderlande, Dematic, SSI, TGW, you name it, hand in hand. Like we're one team, but problems pop up and we're trying to solve them. And I think this is extremely important if you're operating at this scale. And of course, you need a plan, even if you have to deviate. But from the beginning, you need to have, milestones working backwards from the go live date. For me, launching a site on a specific date, this is the most important milestone that we have, and we cannot miss it. So of course, we want to launch safely in the right quality, but we cannot move that milestone, because the moment we do, we're basically shipping millions of customer orders late. Yeah. And that's something we don't want to face. So we need a robust planning backwards from the go live date. And then across all those milestones, you need visibility and tracking mechanisms. You need to have a set of, running KPIs that you can understand how the projects are trending, like safety KPIs, quality KPIs, time, like all the project management standards, basically. But for me, it's important when we look at those KPIs week after week that we understand the trend. So those, measure points need to tell us if we're heading in the right direction or not. And then I think the last thing that I would mention is just having a good business judgment, using the KPIs that you have and trying to look into the future, what can happen, and anticipate that and proactively address those issues.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you said that you kind of have a template, or I think even the way you're describing it's almost like it reminds me of kind of having just the backbone when you said the skeleton. Like it's like the backbone, and then maybe some things are different, so we build off the backbone a little bit differently, but at least having kind of that blueprint to this is how we're going to apply it. And, if we have to deviate, we adapt when we have to, and be flexible, but at least we have some idea, like going into it, what this is potentially going to do. So I'm curious, like when whoever tells you that, like, okay, we need to build a new site, what is the first input or like the first piece of information that is the most critical to you? Like, what are you looking for? Is it like, the throughput that's expected? Is it like the amount of space you have? Like, what is the one thing that you're like looking for right away to know how this is going to look like?
The most critical one, I think it's really hard because there are multiple, obviously, that are really defining how the site will look like, how it will function, etc. But I think for me, it's time, because we have a certain demand in an area, for instance, and this will define the go live date of the site. And if we, because I'm used to work backwards from the customer, and if there's a demand spike expected, or, just volume growth in a certain area, then we need to launch capacity there. And this can define almost everything after that, because you will understand how much month you have left to launch a site, and that will influence, the real estate selection, the size of the site, the technology that can go into the site, because you might not have enough time to build a fully functioning ASRS as an example. So you need to deviate from your design, etc. But I think it all starts with the go live date and then working backwards from it, if I had to name one thing.
Gotcha. Okay, so you're looking to see what kind of deadline you're up against and what you can do in that time. I think that makes a lot of sense there. So tell us a little bit about you've obviously built and launched multiple sites across different companies throughout your career. So let's talk specifically about greenfield sites, and especially ones that are highly automated, right? So tell us a little bit about like what does that typical build out look like? What goes into that? Because obviously, if you're just putting up a traditional warehouse, 4 walls, some racking, not as complex, right? But when you start to get into highly automated systems, like you just mentioned in ASRS, for example, there's a lot more that goes into that. So tell us a little bit about what does that look like from your perspective?
I think for simplicity, I will probably start when the material handling equipment already hits the ground, like when the fit out works start.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's maybe park the whole construction works that are happening before that. But what is really important if you want to do this, at scale and at speed, this is at least how I've experienced it. Don't wait for the building to be finished and practically completed. So I like to work in a scenario that I call like early access. So when certain areas of a building are in a condition that you can actually start with the fit out works, racking, material handling, like conveyor, sorters, robotic solutions, safely, of course, then you go in. And that also means that actually the building of the building and the installation of the material handling equipment will happen in parallel. It will be very closely sequenced to each other, which always bears a risk and, of course, requires extreme coordination and coordination between the different teams on site. But it gives you a huge time advantage doing those two works in parallel. So that's, for me, step number one. And then the first phase is usually, and now I think I will go a bit deeper into the actual execution sequences. Sure. So your material handling equipment integrator comes in, they install all the steel works. That's what usually happens first. The mezzanines, the platforms, the maintenance platforms, the platforms they need for additional, height and later on to install the conveyance. That's step number one. It usually goes pretty fast. And then you continue with mechanical installation. Like all the equipment arrives, every day, dozens of trucks with hardware, because I've seen facilities being built like with 24 kilometers of conveyance or, thousands of square meters of sortation technologies and thousands of robots. So you have a huge inbound supply chain every single day that needs to be orchestrated and needs to arrive more or less, when you need it. Because the storage space is very limited. As I just said, the building is being built while you're installing all the technology. So mechanical installation gets going, just bolting the stuff to the ground. Electricians will come in, start wiring, connecting everything, powering it up, and then moving into the commissioning phase, where you basically start, starting the equipment, starting the engines, testing all the photo eyes and everything. So that's more or less the integrator's work. I think in that phase, from steel work to commissioning, this is what I said earlier. This is pure project management. For my team in particular, we understand we have the right resources on site from our integrators. Is the supply chain on track? We're getting the materials that we need. Is the installation, of course, on track in all those different zones? And because it's running in parallel across multiple floors in highly automated greenfield projects. And last but not least, is also the general contractor of the building on track, because we're still sequencing the elements of the building so that we can continue with the installation. And of course, there are dependencies like power, data, IT infrastructure, etc. So that's pure project management. After, let's say, one area is being installed and commissioned, we're getting actually into a qualification phase. So I like to have certain standards how the vendor needs to demonstrate that the equipment is actually meeting the requirements that we defined earlier. Can be safety requirements, throughput requirements, functional requirements, etc. So we will, in the qualification phase, we will basically go through low volume and functional testing. So we start loading the equipment. We understand if everything is behaving the right way, sortation is working the right way, photo eyes are working the right way, the robotic manipulations are working in the right way. It's all about functionality of the system. If it's according to the standard that was defined in the beginning. And then we start loading the system more, doing pressure testing, like high volume testing. If it's also meeting the capacity, the capacity and the throughput for every single element in the system, every divert, every exit, every sortation element, everything is being tested in depth for capacity. And while you're doing this, of course, very actively engaged in snack list creation, tracking everything that went wrong, safety snacks, mechanical snacks, electrical snacks, functional snacks. So you're in a phase where you're testing heavily, where you need to solve a lot of problems, where you need to be innovative and an engineer to actually fix things together with the integrator. I mean, I remember myself sitting next to controls engineers trying to figure out why the sorter isn't diverting how it's supposed to be, things like that. And then just holding the vendor accountable that they are ticking all those snacks off in a speedy way, like for instance within seven days. So this happens throughout the entire building, through all the areas. And once everything has been qualified, I think it's extremely important to do something that I call throughput qualification. That's basically a stress test.
Okay.
So you will take all the individual elements that belong to one area. Let's take unloading, receiving, identification, bringing the goods maybe into your inventory area, stowing it. All these individual areas have been tested on its own, but we don't know yet if they are working as one inbound function. This is also, where the more automated the solution is, the more complex it gets, because you have multiple interfaces between different technologies. It's not just belt conveyors anymore that run straight. It's like vertical patient lifts, it's manipulation, it's into an ASRS, it's maybe there's a crossbelt sorter or a shoe sorter involved, like all those kind of things. So we do a stress test for an entire area, an end-to-end area, through a longer period of time. Can be 30 minutes, can be 3 hours. So we simulate basically a full operational environment under pressure, like peak business, full speed, and we look at everything again. Safety, quality, throughput, is SCADA working, how it's supposed to work, like all those kind of things. Requires a lot of planning and effort and labor, of course, but it's usually paying. This is where you find the snacks that are really hidden deeply in the code or in the hardware. Sometimes it even irons out some of the manufacturing quality issues, because due to the runtime you see them popping up. So step by step and gradually you're catching more of the things that you don't want when the site is live. You fix them and then you launch, basically.
And just like that, you just I mean, really interesting to kind of hear that step-by-step breakdown, because I think there's there's obviously a lot of moving parts going on, and the one that kind of caught my attention to think about there, right, is like you said, it's like, okay, well, we have so many different components, robots, parts, conveyor pieces, manufacturing things coming in every day inbound, right? I mean, I imagine there's a whole process and plan around unloading that. Where are we going to stage that so it's not in the way of what we're working on tomorrow, so we don't have to move that around constantly, and like you said, try and time it to show up when we need it, right? I mean, that's just in time planning right there, right? So very interesting. And I'm curious on we talked about the final kind of stress test there. Are you stress testing these systems with actual product running through, or do you have test product?
It's dummy product.
What's that?
It's dummy products, basically. So the site isn't live. So it's also, it's still in our protected, I would say, project environment, which is also good because, us and the vendors, we need to do our job before we let operations in. Usually, I like to welcome the maintenance team already so that they can, get in touch with the equipment. They see what's working, what's not working. They are participating and helping. This is super. It's the best training they can actually get, but it's still a simulated environment.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. So now we talked on the greenfield side, right? But obviously, not every site is greenfield, right? There's a ton of brownfield sites out there still as well. So after you get through that greenfield launch and maybe a year later, 2 years later, the site is running, maybe it's multiple years later, right? How do you kind of monitor these existing sites and how do you identify, like, when is it time to reconfigure something, upgrade something? What defines maybe that happens on a site level versus like a larger scale effort as an organization?
It's an interesting question. I think there are probably two ways to retrofitting an existing network. Number one for me is bottom up, because the best innovators are actually the ones that are operating those facilities, especially the legacy sites, because the maintenance and the operations team, they're working with this facility for years, day in, day out. They know exactly where the problems are and where they would require help, improvements. So you often get, especially the bigger your network is, you get tons of innovative and creative requests. It can be, safety and ergonomic enhancements. It can be productivity or enhancements, capacity expansions, things like that. And usually the legacy sites are very hungry because they want to perform, they want to do an amazing job, so they're looking for improvements, and they come back to the operations engineering team asking for support. So that's bottom up. Top down is when you have an existing network of facilities and you're actually thinking what to do with it. How can you level it up so that they can remain state of the art and keep performing like maybe the latest generation of buildings that you have been launching. And that's then more like a program deployment. Let's assume you develop a new packaging automation, which all the new sites have already built in because it's part of the template design, but your legacy buildings don't have it. That's, of course, a fantastic opportunity to start basically a re-engineering program and go, analyzing your existing network, understanding if there's space available, if the machines can be integrated, then starting a rollout of this, new automation across multiple sites as one program. That's one way of doing it. Another thing is that sometimes I've seen that you have existing sites in prime location. And I think this matters for many companies because the real estate environment, especially in Europe 10 years ago, has been very different than it is nowadays. So you might have a brownfield site that is 10 years old, but it's so close to your customer that it actually requires an expansion or maybe even a conversion into a new building type. So perhaps it is a non-conveyable site because that's just what you used to do back then and you build it.
Sure.
But now you would greatly benefit of converting it into a site with smaller items, small, medium-sized items, because maybe that's how your business changed over time. So you go back into that site and you're performing a full conversion of it. You're dismantling everything and you're reinstalling the equipment. This brings it very close to a greenfield project with some nuances because building is already there. You're limited by certain elements of the building, so your template design needs to be tailored towards the circumstances of the building. But I think execution-wise, that's simpler. When you're touching existing buildings in terms of automation, safety, or capacity upgrades, you're entering actually a live environment. And I think many companies cannot afford to turn down their operation just to install
shut it
new
off.
packaging or install a new sorter. So this is where brownfield projects or retrofit projects become extremely complex, because you need to operate, in given downtime windows. You need to ensure that the areas where you are installing new equipment are well segregated so that it's safe for the associates that are working and, shipping customer orders, but also safe for the workers of the integrators that are performing the work. And then, of course, you always have those integration pieces where the new equipment then needs to feed, a parcel or a tote into the existing equipment, which can very often go wrong and shut down the whole system.
Sure.
So it's like, my wife, for instance, she's a doctor. I always describe this as an open heart surgery.
Yeah.
She doesn't see it like that, obviously, but I think for us as logistic experts, it's very close to that.
Yeah. That is a good way to frame it, definitely, because I think it is, as you touched on, like the brownfield site. I mean, if it's, you don't have the luxury to shut down operation at that site, and you got to figure it out while things are going on, it creates a whole another level of complexity and complications to work through and plan through. Yeah. And you got your operations folks who are trying to hit their outbound shipping goals, and then you got engineering coming in, and they're button heads because they're like, you got to get this out of my dock door number 14, right? Get it out of the way. You can't have your parts here, and all that type of thing. So very interesting kind of complexities there. So now tell us a little bit about, because as you mentioned, you've been doing this for a long time, right? And obviously you've been going through kind of the e-commerce boom and how that's kind of changed. And even you just touched on, some nuances with buildings where, all right, it's close to consumer. So like we're close to the customer. So we don't want to lose that site. Obviously, like we're not going to go farther away to do that. But a lot of things have changed in that consumer demand and the expectation, especially around like speed of delivery and things of that nature. So tell us a little bit about how has that kind of impacted the way you go about designing modern fulfillment centers? I mean, today versus like 10 years ago.
Yeah. That's an excellent question, actually. I think for me personally, there are like two things. First of all, this logistics landscape is changing a lot, and that's more or less real estate availability close to your customers, like you already mentioned, and I also spoke about early in our conversation. It's really hard nowadays in certain parts of the world to find real estate that's meeting your purpose in proximity of your customers. And then often when you have it, you're in an environment where labor becomes the second problem, like shortage of labor to actually operate the site. So this is, of course, driving a higher level of automation, but automation that needs to be, flexible, modular to fit into those real estate conditions that are actually available. So it's a bit of a challenge how technology will actually advance going forward, because many technologies out there, they work really nicely in large scale facilities, but you might not have this luxury anymore, because there's the second element, and this is the customer demand. I see again a very strong request for speed, like same day deliveries picking up a lot. Like we have seen Amazon and other companies out there last year and also this year investing heavily into same day, and now also quick commerce. Quick commerce kind of is, I don't know, it feels like it's getting a second chance this time.
I see the same. Yeah.
Like around the world. For me, this is fascinating, of course. The faster it gets, the more challenging it becomes, and we need to solve different we have different opportunities basically to overcome. But this is a very interesting combination that we're facing right now. So real estate is limited, labor is scarce, you need automation, but in I think same day and quick commerce space, making automation work financially is extremely difficult. Because I don't know, you're in the center of London, you're operating a dark store.
Yeah.
The space is very limited, but you want to do this 2-hour delivery to your customers. So inventory placement and selection is super important, but then you need to be fast. And I think a lot of automated solutions still fail in that space. So we default back to normal pickers in shelves that just pick the orders immediately and get them out of the door. But it's a challenge to be solved, and it's very exciting who will do that first, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think, and I agree with you. I mean, it does seem like this quick commerce, micro fulfillment kind of concepts are like having this kind of second wave, right? Like there was a big kind of talk about it during the pandemic because everybody was home, obviously, and people were wanting things very quickly, and then it kind of waned a little bit when people were able to go back out and things like that. But now it seems to be picking up again. To your point there, and I think it's interesting to see. Like you said, as the speed expectation picks up on the consumer side, I think it's very interesting, right? Because on the consumer side, it's like the speed picks up, the convenience increases for the consumer, but it's like as the convenience increases for the consumer, like the complexity for the logistics side becomes increased as well, right? So it gets harder to deliver on that convenience itself. And you mentioned something in there which I get a interesting question for you. Like you talked about when you go to a city center or certain locations where maybe labor is scarce, so like how do we rely more on automation? When you design a building or think about a building that's going to have automation involved, do you know ahead of time, like what the expected human headcount is going to be versus like the amount of automation that's going to go in there? How does that get kind of determined in the process?
Well, I would hope that everybody considers that designing a fulfillment center, because how else would you look at payback time and ROI and pick the right technologies and design for the facility. So I think it's important that you understand what's the labor availability in the region where you want to build, and then use this as an opportunity or a constraint to design your level of automation around it. Yeah. So it's definitely an important input parameter.
Yeah. It's interesting because you may think, because I think in some scenarios, like I'm thinking back in my operation days and what we would think about, and we would think about like, okay, we need X amount of people to, run this department or something like that. And then, but taking that back to like, okay, well, what's the actual labor availability in the market, right? And what can we actually expect from like a percentage of hires versus like how much should we go automate? I think that's a pretty interesting way to think about it there. So now
imagine you're launching a facility worth like $100 billions, highly automated, and you don't have operators, engineers, and mechanics to run it. It won't ship a puzzle. So really important to understand the labor conditions where you are going with your fulfillment center.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because I mean, I've heard some stories too where people have gone towards an area because the real estate was a little cheaper, right? And then they ran into a huge challenge where there's like, we just can't get people because there's just not enough labor in the area to do that. So it's a very interesting kind of consideration on conditions there. So now, maybe along those same lines in terms of advice, right? You kind of talked us through like how you think about things, how you look at these different things. I mean, what advice do you have for others who are kind of looking to expand their network footprint or just designing a new building, greenfield site for their own fulfillment operations?
Yes, I think first of all, it's really important that you work backwards from the customer. What the customer actually needs. And what do I mean by that is that I have like throughout those 15 or 16 years, I've seen so many small and big companies wasting millions, on technology and hardware that is actually not helping the customer to be happier, to get the right products at the right time and the right quality. It's like sometimes And I don't mean this, with any bad feelings, but if you go to integrators and they design a solution for you, they, of course, are very proud of their own product and they will try to meet the request or the demand that you have as their customer. But often you don't even fully understand how the facility should look like. So you might be building something that is not helping to, satisfy your customers better. And I think it's really important that you're operating with the right experts, because that's usually, resulting in, 30 to 50% CapEx reduction on the facility that you're about to build. If you truly understand what your customer needs and other elements that we discussed, like labor availability, real estate limitations, etc., and then design backwards from that, rather than I've seen a nice technology somewhere and I want to have it, let's build it that way. This usually doesn't, build a fulfillment center that in the end also pays off, because it's a massive investment, and that investment should make your customers happy. Otherwise, it's not returning anytime soon. I think that's one thing that I would mention. And then the other one is just something a bit closer to my heart, and that's more about health and safety, because having built so many facilities and hundreds of retrofit projects, you're always operating with humans. So when you're running a greenfield project during the construction phase, please put construction safety first, because all those workers, they're usually operating under, high pressure, little time, very exhausting jobs. We need to ensure that they're getting back safely to their families at the end of their shift or their day. And then the second element is design solutions that are healthy and ergonomically correct for the people that will later on work with the equipment. It's warehouse operations. We have an opportunity with robotics and automation, to make this as comfortable as it gets for the people working there. And I think we have a responsibility to basically engineer things in an ergonomic way and reduce, the risk on health and safety for the people operating the facility later on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. And I love that last piece of advice there, because I think that is such a critical part of the design is the human element of it all, right? And, we talk so much about, robotics and automation and AI and all these things coming in, but at the end of the day, there's still a core, team that is going to be in there from a human perspective. So how do we make them, like you said, as comfortable as possible, as safe as possible, best ergonomics, and really think about that, and how do we do that? And also love your advice there too around, not designing around a solution or piece of equipment that you think is going to be the solution, but design more around like the conditions you're in and fit into those conditions, versus build something and then try and make it fit into the conditions that you have, right? I think that's a great piece of advice there. So really appreciate you coming on the show today, Michael, and kind of sharing all of your experience with us. Certainly very interesting to hear about, how you approach a lot of these things. And obviously, you've done this a lot as we've talked about here. So really appreciate you sharing with us. If people are interested in getting in touch or maybe asking you some questions, what's the best way to do that?
The best way, if they just hit me on LinkedIn, that's the easiest way. Just send a connection request. If you want to chat about logistics, e-commerce, and fulfillment, I'm always there. It's my passion topic. So
yes, like absolutely. That. All right. And we'll definitely put a link to Michael's LinkedIn profile at thenewwarehouse.com, as well as in the show notes here. So Michael, thank you once again for your time on the show today.
You've been listening to the New Warehouse Podcast with Kevin Lawton. Subscribe and check us out online at thenewwarehouse.com.
Enjoyed this episode? Make sure you are subscribed to the podcast, and for more content from the New Warehouse, find us on LinkedIn and YouTube. Links to subscribe can be found in the show notes. And for everything The New Warehouse, head to thenewwarehouse.com.